Hello and welcome to World Stories. I'm Layla Harak with your weekly International Reporters magazine. Coming up in the next half hour, we learn about growing crops on rooftops in a Palestinian refugee camp and get tips from a teacher in Romania about healthy eating. But first, this week is one of the holiest weeks in Christianity. It's Easter. Worshippers mark the crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Central to the celebrations is, of course, Jesus. But in a Mexican town, it's Judas who takes the lead. During the Semana Santa, local residents of Purisima del Rincon really get into the spirit of things. Thousands of people stroll along the streets during the annual Easter parade. They wear masks depicting Judas, his accomplice Malchus, and the devil. Estefania Navarrete from TV Guanajuato has this story on an unconventional Easter tradition.
The Judea is one of the most important traditions in Purisima del Rincon. The town of 43,000 inhabitants is just 15 minutes outside of León, the largest city in the Mexican state of Guanajuato. For 137 years, the Judea has taken place during Holy Week, the celebrations commemorating the crucifixion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. One of the most important days in the Catholic Church is Good Friday, the day on which Christ is said to have died. The Judea commemorates the role of Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus. He is depicted using two masks. The first is the white Judas, and he opens the Wednesday events.
This is the mask of the white Judas, also called the sad one. His day is Wednesday, when Judas dresses in white, showing that he has not yet sinned. But along his way, he tries to tempt Malchus into selling Jesus out with him.
On Good Friday, the Judas mask becomes black. Because of his betrayal of Jesus and his being paid for bearing false witness, Judas now appears like a ghost.
With the features of this mask, the artist who created them shows that the sin has now been committed. Judas now knows about morals, which is why the Jews are also persecuting him. I think that the artist is hinting at how they strangle him. Or maybe it's just an expression of sin.
Malchus, or the advisor as some call him, is another figure of the three-day Judea celebration. He accompanies Judas, who has incited him to sin.
It's like his eyes are popping out. Before Jesus is arrested by the soldiers, there's a scene in which Simon Peter cuts off Malchus's right ear with his sword. That's why he has this expression.
The devil is the great tempter who convinces Judas to betray Jesus. He is also depicted with two masks. His is the only figure that accompanies Judas to the end, to the noose.
When Judas identifies Jesus with a kiss, the devil laughs. That's perfectly captured in this mask, which also suggests an old man.
Purisima del Rincon comes alive when more than 300 people dressed up as biblical Jews in costumes and wooden masks form a procession down the town's main street, following the figure of Judas Iscariot. The characters and masks were all originally created by Don Hermenegildo Bustos, a 19th century artist from the town. The new masks are all handmade, carved from the wood of coral trees that grow nearby. Experienced wood carvers can create a mask in less than 8 days, while those new to the job can spend up to 6 months working on a single piece.
Here we have the wood of the coral tree from which we carve the mask.
Tomamos la medida de la máscara que vamos a hacer, lo cortamos y después le quitamos el sobrante.
We remove everything superfluous, especially from the back, and take measurements for the mask.
Y empezamos a sacarle los rasgos.
We start creating the basic contours. Then we let the wood dry before carving out facial features and things like the mustache and beard. Then it all has to be finely sanded with a grinding compound. And then it's sealed, so the paint will go on properly.
Sellador para que esté listo para la pintura.
The painted wooden masks can last for several years. The first examples, created by Hermenegildo Bustos in 1873, are now kept in the Mask Museum in Purisima del Rincon's Cultural Center. There are more than 100 masks depicting the figures and characters that feature in the Judea. Each year, the spectacle draws more than 12,000 people to Purisima del Rincon, turning the town into Mexico's largest open-air theater for a few days.
The West African nation of Mali has experienced much unrest recently. A rebellion in the north, a military coup in the south, a political system near collapse, and now an ongoing offensive against militants. Given all that, you can understand why many young Malians are fleeing their homes in droves. The Malian government, backed by the United Nations, has embarked on a campaign to create jobs. They hope to bring back long-term stability for future generations by offering young people the chance to make a living. UNTV's Joanne Leviton reports.
It was a year ago that Diallo Haroun returned home to Mali from Côte d'Ivoire. He lives in the village of Gourma-Rarous, in the desert just south of the river Niger. Most people here are farmers, but severe dry spells have resulted in shrinking harvests. And the war raging between the Islamist fighters and French and African forces have resulted in a mass exodus, not just in Gourma-Rarous. Many young people in northern Mali have fled to cities and neighboring countries such as Côte d'Ivoire, Niger, and Ghana, which has had a devastating impact on communities here, leaving villages and towns like Diallo's populated largely by children and the elderly. But Diallo has come back because he has hope for a future here despite the war. The Ministry of Agriculture says employing Mali's youth is crucial.
We all know the youth is the future of a country. If they are unemployed, they are always at risk of drifting and of creating problems. So, to try and occupy these youths, to try and find work for these youngsters, is one of the most important things of a country.
Shortly after returning to Mali, Diallo heard about a government project created to do just that. Supported by the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development, the project offers training and work opportunities to local youth. Diallo bought a motor pump and got help to develop a small business growing livestock feed, which he stores and sells to neighbors.
I have managed to feed our animals, and we can put some to one side in a storehouse. Then, at a certain time, I sell it, so with that money I can cover all our needs.
For many young people here, the chance to earn a living would be a reason to come home and stay. But intense fighting in the north of the country has kept most away. Hama Agassi is an exception. He was recently trained as a builder during the project's construction of a new irrigation system, which links the river Niger to his village.
The impact for me, as head of the family with children, is that now I have animals, a house, and work tools. So for me, I have to say it is going well.
The more young people find employment here, the more the local economy benefits. But in the end, Mali's future could be jeopardized by the ongoing conflict.
Green rooftops are sprouting on homes all over a refugee camp in the West Bank near Bethlehem. Daily life for displaced Palestinians is marred by hardships. Food shortages are not unheard of, but there could be a fix to that problem: vegetable patches growing on top of buildings. Agricultural engineers have teamed up with residents to introduce hydroponic gardens. It's a technology that doesn't rely on much soil to grow crops, but instead uses water. The end game is to grow enough vegetables to meet the community's consumption needs throughout the year. Al Arabia's Abdul Hafiz Jawan explains.
Amid these densely built homes for poor families, tender shoots are emerging. They're a sign of new life in the Palestinian refugee camps. Hajar Hamdan lives in the Deshe camp in the West Bank. As soon as she comes home, she goes up on her roof, where there's a small kind of container garden. A few plants have already started to grow.
I like working with plants. The people here have always lived from agriculture. But now we no longer have any land, so we're using our roofs. I've planted beans, eggplant, bell peppers, and tomatoes. I hope I can benefit from the experience of the young people and the engineers involved.
This agricultural engineer explains that plants that don't need so much water are planted further away from the water source. Those that need more are placed right next to it. He's giving Hajar support with her garden. He heads an initiative whose goal is to use the rooftops in the refugee camp for alternative projects.
This project is meant to make up for the lack of land in the refugee camps. Statistics tell us that poverty is greater here than in the countryside. The residents of the refugee camps have no steady income. In the villages, people have sheep and a bit of land they can grow food on. Our project is taking advantage of the rooftops and sunlight.
The gardens are assembled using simple means. The quality of the soil and the irrigation system are essential to growing enough fruits and vegetables to feed a single family. And the scale of the gardens is small enough to fit on the rooftops of these houses. The advantages are obvious to the residents.
We save money on food. Right now, tomatoes cost 7 shekels a kilo. So if I grow them myself, I save a lot of money.
These modern cultivation methods are used intensely these days. We use a hydroponic system that allows us to do a lot. Water flows through the pipes. And in order to deal with the lack of space, we use a method that solves the problem of the roots. So you can grow things at home, and you don't need a lot of space.
A group of young people is helping to implement the initiative. They go from rooftop to rooftop in the refugee camps and help the families with their gardens in order to make sure the yield is as high as possible.
The idea was born out of necessity. They say necessity is the mother of invention. As refugees, we live in dwellings without a front yard or anything like that. There's no land where you can grow vegetables. To deal with the economic need, we looked for ways we could grow vegetables and create a kind of self-sufficient economy. The Karama organization is in charge of the project.
By allowing people to grow fruits and vegetables for their own consumption, this small-scale agricultural project is a big help for families struggling to get by. Many of the families living in the refugee camps were displaced from the land they owned following the Israeli Declaration of Independence in 1948. This project helps them regain some of the self-sufficiency they've lost. The little gardens take up only a bit of space on the rooftops of the refugee camp, but they have a great significance, one which goes beyond easing poor families' financial needs. They also help give back the refugees a feeling of home. For Al Arabiya, this is Abdul Hafiz Shawan at the Deshe refugee camp in the Palestinian territories.
Imagine a Chinese crab species shows up in a river half a world away. It gets its claws into the local ecology, and before you know it, it destroys the entire native water species. In today's interconnected world, it's not just people and trade that move freely. Bugs, plants, and animals too roam the globe. One of the culprits? International cargo ships. They unintentionally spread all kinds of creatures to places where they shouldn't be. These so-called invasive species wreak havoc to a country's environment and economy. Stopping the influx is no easy task, but maritime experts in the United States are coming up with ways to keep them out.
At first glance, it looks like an average ship, but this one has stowaways. Each year, millions of them make their way halfway around the world. But they're not hidden in the containers being unloaded at the port of Baltimore, Maryland. These invasive species are traveling in the ballast water, which means they immigrate to parts of the world where they are not native.
Well, invasive species is an enormous problem. It's always listed as one of the top 3 environmental issues facing the world today. Invasive species can change habitats they colonize, they can cause crashes of fisheries, and so there's enormous economic and ecological cost to invasive species.
For example, the zebra mussel. Originally from Europe, the freshwater bivalve has colonized many waterways in Canada and the United States, where it's killing native animal species and blocking pipelines. This crustacean is another species not native to North America, the Chinese mitten crab. But how do animals like these get into ships? Every vessel has a ballast tank which it fills with water, and that waters small inhabitants before every voyage. Upon reaching its destination, the ship expels that ballast water into that harbor.
Ballast water is used to manage the ship's draft, that is how far down in the water it sits. The last thing you want is for your vessel to be bobbing around on the surface like a cork.
Here in Baltimore Harbor lies the Maritime Environmental Resource Center's test ship. Researchers here are using it to find a way to stop the spread of invasive species.
It's actually a mimic of a ballast tank. It's large, it's 300 cubic meters, but for a real ship it would probably be small, maybe a third or a tenth of the size of a real ballast tank. Ours are meant to be smooth on the inside with a slanted bottom so we can capture every drop of water when we're doing our tests.
The scientists' idea is to try to prevent any animals that may be in the ballast tank from getting into the harbor along with the water. The first step is a mechanical filter.
They remove the larger organisms first, and then they will treat the smaller organisms, because the idea is that they're more susceptible to whatever the treatment is. So this guy would have been stopped by the mechanical filter as long as it was functioning properly.
The smaller organisms that slip through the filter would be killed by a second step, removing oxygen, adding chemicals, or subjecting them to ultraviolet rays. The scientists hope the concept can be implemented by 2016. The U.S. is implementing tougher regulations that make shipping companies responsible for their animal stowaways too.
Next, some food for thought. Schools in Romania are getting kids into eating healthier foods. Students in the city of Turda, Transylvania are learning about what foods are good for them. Promoting healthy eating habits is part of the curriculum, and as a special treat, children get cooking lessons from visiting chefs. They teach them how to prepare a nutritious, delicious meal. The kids love it and are now getting their parents to make healthier food choices too. TVR's Irina Luca on healthy lessons from Romania.
At this school in the Transylvanian city of Turda, chef Marta Poșoni is teaching these first graders all about healthy cooking and eating.
Do you know why I'm here today? There's a nutrition education program in all the kindergartens and schools in Turda. I visited you before. We started in January. Do you remember what the program is called?
The children remember that it's called healthy and yummy, so Marta asks them what those words mean. Paul explains that yummy means food tastes good, and healthy means that the food has no artificial chemicals, no bacteria, and no artificial colours. Marta says that's right. It means food only has what it gets naturally. So where did the idea of cooking in schools come from?
Cooking in schools is very good practice for children. There hasn't been this kind of practical activity in education until now. So we came up with the idea. Above all, it's important that the young generation, which will be producing our food in 15 or 20 years, gets to discover a wide variety of flavors.
Marta cooks rice with the kids and explains that instead of using water, they'll use the vegetable broth they'd prepared together earlier. She asks Paul what he wants to be when he grows up, and he says he wants to be a chef. She tells him not to forget and jokes that she'll call him in 15 years so that they can do this program together. Except that then he'll be the one cooking for the children.
We try to create stories for the children. We want them to learn to love food and cooking, preparing meals.
So Marta tries to get the kids to think about carrots, for instance, in a different way. It turns out that some of the kids really like carrots a lot. Marta asks them who else likes carrots. She puts that question to Alexandra, who said earlier that she wants to be a vet. And of course, the answer is rabbits. I haven't seen many fast food places in Turda.
They do exist.
Do they get customers?
They do, yes. The kids' problem is that they're no longer given lunch to take to school. Their parents give them money, and then the children and teenagers end up eating a lot of fast food.
These children are eating cauliflower and broccoli, and they tell me they like it. Have you changed the lives of any children by teaching them to eat differently?
Yes, I've heard that I have. Sometimes parents ask me what I've done with their child. Children who used to not eat peas or green beans and only knew prepared foods from the supermarket. Now kids of 5, 6, or 8 years old go to the market with their parents and say, let's get things from this farmer. She's from the countryside, from a village, and she makes her cheese from real cow's milk.
And with that, we've come to the end of this week's edition. From all of us here and our partner stations around the world, thanks for watching. Don't forget to watch this show again. Head to our website at dw.de/worldstories. We're going to leave you now with this week's Fix of the World. See you next time.